Got it. Da, da, da. Okay, we are live. So, welcome everyone to this online version of Second Tuesday, the center's longest running cultural event. My name is Greg Newton, and I am representing actually the Bureau of General Services Queer Division, which is the queer bookstore inside the LGBT Center. So, we're an all volunteer queer bookstore inside the center on the second floor, room 210. And we have regular bookstore hours, Wednesdays through Sundays from 1 to 7. And then we often stay open later for events. But tonight we're joining you online since our main guest, Dan Glass, was not able to get a visa. You'll hear more about that in a moment. But we're glad that the technology exists to allow us to get together anyway. So I'm going to read a brief land acknowledgement, and then I'm going to introduce our three guests, and we're going to jump right in. So thanks everyone for joining us, and here we go. So the Bureau acknowledges that our organization operates on the unceded land of the Munsee Lenape. We encourage you to join the Bureau in signing up to make a monthly donation to the American Indian Community Houses Mannahatta Fund. The Mannahatta Fund, according to its website, is an invitation to all settlers and non-Native people who wish to acknowledge the legacy of theft and genocide that comprise the history of New York City and the United States. You can find out more at mannahattafund.org, and I'll put that in the chat. We also want to recognize that our own government is actively supporting the State of Israel's genocidal campaign against the Palestinian people with our tax dollars. We hope that you will join us in calling for a permanent ceasefire and an end to the siege in order to end the collective punishment of Palestinians and to ensure the swift delivery of much needed food, water, medicine, fuel, and medical aid to the people of Gaza. And we'll be talking more about that tonight. So our three panelists, first of all, Dan Glass is an AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, ACT UP, healthcare and human rights activist, performer, presenter, and writer. Dan has been recognized as Activist of the Year with the Sexual Freedom Awards and was announced a BBC Greater Londoner for founding Queer Tours of London, A Mince Through Time. His book, United Queerdom, From the Legends of the Gay Liberation Front to the Queers of Tomorrow, was Observer Book of the Week. And we did an event with Dan online for that too, back during the shutdown. Good times. Dan recently founded self-defense empowerment program Bender Defenders and Queer Night Pride to confront rising hate crime. And you can follow him on Instagram at Dan Glass Mincer. C, Constantine Jones, is an interdisciplinary Greek-American thing maker raised in Tennessee and housed in Brooklyn. They are the director of the Visual AIDS Oral History Project, The Body as an Archive, as well as a member of the collective What Would an HIV Doula Do? They are the author of the novel In Still Rooms, Operating System 2020, and a collaborative chapbook with Portuguese visual artist Vicente Sampaio, Balin, A Poem in 12 Days, from Ursus Americanus 2022. Their work has been performed or exhibited across NYC and Tennessee. And finally, Jason Rosenberg is the current communications manager at AVAC, where he oversees AVAC's editorial calendar and overall online content. Prior to joining AVAC, Jason was the national organizer at Housing Works, assisting on the Act Now End AIDS Coalition and other national policy goals integral to ending the epidemic in the US. Jason joined AVAC in June 2022, bringing over 8 years of community organizing experience and an always evolving communications perspective. He holds a BA in political science and African American studies from the University at Buffalo, SUNY. Jason is a co-founding member of PrEP for All, an organization dedicated to ensuring universal PrEP access for all, an ACT UP New York and Reclaim Pride Coalition member, and was named in 2020's Logo 30 by Logo TV. You can find writings of his on public health, HIV/AIDS, and queer identity in publications such as Teen Vogue, Out Magazine, The Advocate, The Body, and Hey Alma. So please give them, well, give them a warm welcome, I would say, but they can't see you, but we'll feel it. So welcome, Dan, welcome, C, and welcome, Jason.
Thanks, Greg. Did you want me to jump in with a little reading?
Please.
Oh, okay. And before I do that, I know we don't have enough hours in the day, but I'm so grateful to be with you three and with all the audience as well. I know it's being recorded. Um, I was planning to obviously be with you in person, and I've been planning to be with you in person for years. But the America for years, I've been wanting to meet you, and I've been so inspired by ACT UP New York, Visual Aids, the Bureau, the Centre. I must have seen the floorboards of the New York Centre hundreds of times when we've been screening the film United in Anger across the UK and beyond. But because of different parts of my activism, I didn't get my visa, namely being part of Baby Trump, because they thought I was taking the piss out of your president, which I was, and other
Good
things.
work. Good work.
Yeah, I know. But what one day, hopefully, I'll get to you in person. But it is such an honor to be with you, and I'm so looking forward to learn more about visual aids, ACT UP New York, and I've been also swatting up today on what would an HIV doula do, more about AVAC if I'm pronouncing it right. Anyway, I'm really looking forward to our discussion. Um, I'll start off just with two little readings from my book, Queer Footprints, A Guide to Uncovering London's Fierce History, which is dedicated to ACT UP. And I'll read you about that. Essentially, it's distilled from 2,000 case studies of LGBTQA plus and HIV and AIDS parties, protests, movements, meetings, scandalous shags in alleyways across different parts of London, down to 7 routes and 32 what I call mini minces, short queer power stops. So, if you're in London, you can do the walks. It's a very practical book, but you can also read about it and do it when maybe you come to London. And it's very much about transatlantic inspiration as well, and about the connections between our queer and HIV and AIDS movements. But I'm just going to read you, first of all, the dedication to ACT UP. This summer of 2023 marks my 18th anniversary, HIV-versary, a moment to reflect and celebrate learning to live and love again since being diagnosed HIV positive. Back in 2005, I didn't have a Scooby-Doo what to think or do until a gorgeous lover took me in his arms, you know who you are, and told me to learn about a movement called ACT UP, AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power. I read about them and watched films about them, and their founding principles struck me right in the center of my heart. ACT UP were united in anger and committed to direct action to end the AIDS crisis, along with the broader inequalities and injustices that perpetuate it. Who are these people and where can I find them? Soon enough, this movement literally saved my life. Without them, so dramatic, but it's true. Without them, I wouldn't have vital emotional support, practical information, and have been welcomed into a family of mutual aid, and of course, have access to life-saving medication. In fact, without ACT UP, I wouldn't have become a healthcare and LGBTQIA plus activist, and I wouldn't be writing this now. Before I learned about ACT UP, I actually thought that it was the government who resolved the AIDS crisis. How wrong I was. Real change and real support came from us. It was the hundreds of people at the dying protests in Trafalgar Square. It was brave friends abseiling and protesting to Parliament. That was on the eve of the Section 28 law, legendary action. It was the radical refusal of nurses working on AIDS wards to leave the dying alone. It was Dykes donating blood. It was Queens on support phone lines throughout the night. I'm talking about LGBT Switchboard. It was clandestine meetings in the back of bookshops, like Gaze the Word bookshop. We love you, Gaze the Word. It was booksellers resisting police raids. It was Whitney Houston singing at AIDS rallies in Hyde Park, and so much more. All are covered in this book. Since learning about ACT UP, I've been hooked on people power and listening to the voices underneath the pavement, pushing us to march onwards, hand in hand, heads held high. I knew I had to find out how more about how extraordinary people, like all humans, like you reading this book and all of you watching as well, can change the world. And then I talked a bit about Trafalgar Square, so I'm just going to read the Trafalgar Square, a tiny bit of that section. And each map, which are by my friend, an amazing ACT UP artivist and illustrator, Mark Glasgow, each route has a map as well. And each, obviously, I'm the author, but you can maybe see Andrea, who is an incredible actor, long-term ACT UP activist who spent a lot of time in New York, actually. She's the guide in that Trafalgar Square route because you see the route through the eyes of someone who's made a significant impact in the area. And last World AIDS Day, we did a die-in Trafalgar Square, and she was there 30 years ago in 1990. Same place at the die-ins then. So I'll just read you the last bit of Trafalgar Square. Um, when Andrea's life partner died from AIDS in 1995, she founded the John Mordaunt Trust, a peer support and advocacy project for daily drug users to honor John's memory. Since the die-in, she has gone all over the world promoting drug reform in communities around the world and to meetings at the United Nations, with her focus being the self-organization of ex and current injection drug users. The social bonds created through the Courage to Act by ACT UP and the HIV movement of the 1980s and 1990s had its roots in the work of the Gay Liberation Front, GLF, who set the stage here at Trafalgar Square 20 years before, which in turn was directly born out of the Stonewall uprisings in 1969 in your neck of the woods. The playbook for direct action around AIDS, and often the activists themselves, came straight from the Gay Liberation Front, who provided the template and toolkit for effective activism. Through exploring the genealogy of protest that led us to the current moment, we release the stories of human scarcity and begin to thrive as individuals and as movements hungry for collective social change. You know what? I'm going to leave it there. The last two paragraphs, if I may say so myself, are great, but we've only got 50 minutes, and I really want to learn and listen from you. So I'll end there. And here's my mug dedicated to British icon George Michael, also in the book. Oh, I've got on the chat. Uh, oh yeah, here we go. Thank you, Greg. Did you want me to start off with questions, Greg? Yeah, great. And anyone listening, please do ask any questions on the chat as well. Okay, we could go through so many things, but we were talking before as a springboard for our conversation to really explore the powerful and effective and strategic intersections of our movement. Obviously, a lot of our energy and heart is focused on what's going on in Palestine at the moment. Personally, I was really inspired by seeing the correct me if I'm wrong, Fund Healthcare Not War action on World AIDS Day. I guess I don't know who wants to go first. Jason C. Can you tell us highlights of either ACT UP New York activism or AVAC or visual aids recently? What's been keeping your spirits going?
Yeah, I guess I'll kick us off. Thank you, Dan, and thank you for that beautiful shout out to Andrea, who I met in London recently too.
Yep.
Uh, she's wonderful. But yeah, I could definitely kick us off in that conversation. So, I've been an active member at JVP for a little while now, but a longtime member of ACT UP, and I think when we were thinking a lot about our actions as of recent. For instance, we replicated and were inspired by the Day of Desperation action that happened um, from ACT UP back in 1991. And, you know, when JVP organizers let me know that the Grand Central action was happening, automatically I thought of ACT UP and I said, and I thought of those images that came to mind, and right now we're looking in parallel of those images, and a lot of what was grounded in those protests was fund healthcare, not warfare. Um, and you know, some of those same banners were the same too. Mourn the dead, fight for the living. And in 1991, ACT UP was fighting for healthcare, and not an ongoing warfare that was happening in the Gulf War. At the moment, in the US at least, we're facing close to 1 billion of healthcare cuts to HIV funding, one under a CDC global HIV funding line, and another that is more broadly based in domestic HIV cuts. And yet, there's no hesitancy of sending billions and billions of dollars to Israel's campaign, genocidal campaign against Palestinians in Gaza. Um, and, when we brought a lot of these intersections together, we thought of the iconic imagery of that fund healthcare, not warfare. And a lot of the images that were brought from Grand Fury and the Silence Equals Death Project, and, in some ways reclaim them based on those fundamental ideas. And, actually last night I spoke at a Prayers for Palestine Liberation rally that happened in Barclays, and I brought together a lot of these few points um, that I'll kind of invoke in our space right here, is that, when as activists, we say that healthcare is a human right, but if we're not speaking up while our taxpayer dollars are being sourced to destroy and decimate hospitals and healthcare systems in Gaza, then how are we saying with our full voice, healthcare is a human right? And if we're saying that housing is healthcare, but we're refusing to condemn the displacement and destruction of homes in Gaza, then how are we saying housing is healthcare? And if we're saying that food security and access to clean water is healthcare, yet our leadership is staying silent while Israel implements blockades on water and food to Gaza, then how are we saying food security and access to clean water is healthcare? And these are fundamental ideas as healthcare activists, as HIV activists, that we are embedded in our movement struggles. And that's kind of where our intersections fall as when we think about the 35th World AIDS Day that happened now 11 days ago, that we cannot end an epidemic if we're not creating avenues of investment. We cannot end an epidemic if we are not ensuring that we are ending an epidemic for all. And that's kind of what we invoke both in my work in JVP, and with ACT UP, is that none of us are, there's no liberation for anyone if there's not liberation for anyone. And there's no safety for anyone unless there's safety for everyone. So that is kind of what I'm bringing to the space. I also want to make note too that although I work for AVAC, I'm not speaking on behalf of AVAC. But that is a lot of, where my mind, and I think a lot of our mind, is at. And I'll pass the baton to you, C, to add anything.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. That's like really incredible, groundwork. Also, Dan, you're far too modest. Like, you could have read 5 more pages, and I'm sure everybody would have been happy. But yeah, I mean, so like Jason, I work at Visual AIDS, which is an organization that I love, but I'm also here speaking like on behalf of myself and nobody else. And I think that that distinction is important because on one hand, there is what you can do in the capacity that you have in the job that you do, but then there's also what you can do within these activist frameworks that people are coming together for a reason that is not a paycheck, right? And so there's a different kind of investment from people coming together in activist spaces that is just fundamentally always going to be different. It's the same reason that I love, for example, I'm also an educator at a university here in New York, but and as much as I love that, I also love to facilitate outside of academia because again, it's like where can I really like step into like my full instigative power, I guess. So yeah, but so I only very recently got brought into the JVP X ACT UP fold, specifically for this action that happened on World AIDS Day this year. And that felt really really special, and also really tough for a lot of reasons, which I'm sure we'll get into. But I am like primarily a poet and somebody who deals in language and deals in text. And so I wrote just 3 very short phrases of my own that I was sort of circulating online at the same time as the fund healthcare, not warfare phrase. So if I could just offer those really quickly, they are: we remind you that healthcare is a human right. We remind you that divestment from healthcare and investment in genocide are inherently connected. And we remind you that another world is possible. And what I think, you know, just speaking very personally and candidly, like I grew up in sort of rural East Tennessee, where the only sort of mention of AIDS in my life was in public school sex ed, which was basically like, don't do it or else. And that was it. There was no actual, you know, we were not dignified with the respect of information. And so I didn't think about HIV, right? Like at all, until all of a sudden I started to live with it. And then I very much had to think about it. And so I just want to say that also, just as like a, you know, context and a point of like humility, I guess, because it wasn't until then, it wasn't until it directly impacted me that I also began to realize how HIV directly impacts so much else. And I think that the dominant sort of HIV AIDS narrative in this country for many years has been one of like, particularly within the context of queer sexual health, and without denying that very real history, I want to just also offer that HIV is, yes, it is a healthcare issue. It is also a harm reduction issue. It is also a racial issue. It is also a class issue. It is also a housing issue. It is also like, it is also, there are so many different spokes, you know, on the sort of HIV AIDS wheel, and you can come to it by many different avenues. And so I think that what's really, really important about and what was really inspiring to me about that particular action was this moment of 2 groups of people recognizing, okay, these struggles are fundamentally interrelated. You know, I'm embedded in a very precarious United States healthcare system where like I'm uninsured, and only because of like one particular program, ADAP, like am I able to get the medication that keeps me undetectable. Okay, that's my healthcare issue. Bombing hospitals indiscriminately in Gaza, that is a healthcare issue as well. And it's undeniable, sort of, you have to try very hard. And you have to lie to yourself a lot to ignore those parallels, I think. So yeah, I feel like I've sort of I feel myself running a little bit now, so I'm gonna stop and see if anybody else wants to say anything. But these are just like the sort of the first things on my mind.
Oh, thank you both so much. Greg, what about yourself, babe? In terms of how are you feeling about the World AIDS Day action? where your spirit is at with it all?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always running the bookstore, and that is my life. um, so I haven't been involved in actions. I mean, honestly, the very little that I've done with regard to this unfolding disaster is just simple little social media posts. And normally we don't post about contemporary events, what's going on, even when they're queer related. I just, we keep our focus on the bookstore, on our events, on what's going on. I feel like generally people don't need to have our opinion on things, and I feel like uh I don't generally want to be in that role. I want to be in the role of, this is a space for you to use, for our community. But at some point, it feels ridiculous not to say something. And so I did post something on Instagram about, it was a Books for Palestine, a fundraiser. And it was just a simple, like, I'm a bookseller and I stand with Palestine. And for the most part, it was really, we got a lot of likes on Instagram, but we also got a few, what you might expect. And people saying things like, well, why didn't you post anything on October 7th? And I explained, like, look, I don't post even when there's been the Orlando shooting, that killed queer people in a queer club. We didn't post anything. There's so much horrible things going on all the time, and we don't post about them because I figure people are getting that elsewhere. They're not coming to us for that. But it was an interesting moment just to see, like, okay, I feel like most of our community, most of the people who are following us on social media and participating in events are with us, to be sure, and that's very encouraging, and that's great to see. Some others, it's been a little disappointing to see some people who we've been friends with, to call us out as this being something fashionable, and I'm like, no, it's no. One of our very first events back when we started in 2012 was with Sarah Schulman, reading from Israel, Palestine, and the Queer International. And in 2014, we held a vigil for Gaza, as when during that bombing campaign. So it's something that goes back, and it's important to us. And like everyone's been saying, it's all very entwined. It is all very much about where do our tax dollars go? And for the most part in the US, they're going to the military industrial complex, and it's vast, and it's something we barely talk about. So I've been very encouraged by the activism. I'm so glad to see so many people who, you never know where people stand until a moment like this. And it's been very encouraging to see that for the most part, I've been happy to see just how much of an outpouring there has been, in terms of calling for an end to this nightmare, and recognizing that all that funding for bombs could be funding for healthcare, could be funding for education, could be funding for arts, could be funding for life. So we keep doing what we're doing on the bookstore front, but we want to be involved, and we're glad to see that the community is really, a lot of people are stepping up.
Oh, thanks, Greg, so much. I just wanted to jump in with, I guess one of the things that I've always been like so inspired by, ACT UP New York and HIV and AIDS healthcare movements in the States in general, is the intersections, is the spokes. And I know obviously I might be romanticizing it because I'm looking at it from afar and I don't know what's going on inside, but you are really like powerful intersectional movement building from what I've seen and what I've read, obviously, working with Sarah Schulman and being inspired by her books, Let the Record Show, The Queer International, Israel, Palestine, etc. Obviously, Peter Staley, we've also brought over to the UK for World AIDS Day events and book launches with his amazing book, Never Silent, as well. So I've always been inspired by the intersections. I mean, housing works. If I come to the States, when I come to the States, I also just want to like live and work and understand from housing works as well. I mean, I think it's interesting hearing you say that we, we we obviously need to do more as a movement, obviously with what's going on. But I think in Britain, we've been so broken, like so broken by the barbaric regime of Thatcher during Section 28, during the first pandemic, and the divide and rule structure that's now going on still with Tory rule, that we don't have as much of the intersections. Not saying that that's our fault. We've just been so divided as a society. So I think we've got so much to learn from the intersection of the movements that you do. But just to give a few of examples of the intersections that we've been doing in the UK, which I think this important conversation can help us build. One of the proudest things from ACT UP London, obviously ACT UP London was around in 80s and 90s. We reformed it in 2014. One of the first actions that we did actually was outside the Home Office. It was a protest called Docs Not Cops, Doctors Not Coppers, police, because the police were being encouraged to ask everyone by the racist governmental system, if they come to the doctors, they have to bring their passport, which is obviously going to discourage a lot of people to go to the doctors if they've got precarious asylum status, because that's literally how the hostile environment strategy enforced by the government has evolved. And so obviously people may not be getting their HIV diagnosis, etc. That was one spark, which then led to a massive movement. I think there was like 6 of us dressed in strange little leather outfits outside the Home Office. And that led onto the wider Docs Not Cops movement, which is a whole UK-wide network of doctors and nurses and healthcare workers who are challenging the hostile environment seeping into the National Health Service. And they've been doing lots of campaigns like Patients Not Passports, etc., which really look at the intersections of race, gender, migration, HIV, etc. So that's one of the amazing ripple effects that's come out of one of our actions. 2 other little examples, and I'm saying these to celebrate them and see how we can build on in the current situation that we're facing. The bit that I didn't read, but it's the Catwalk for Power, Resistance and Hope is one of the key projects led by ACT UP Women and other incredible HIV women's networks like Positively UK. And it's so beautiful and so fierce. It is what it says. It's a catwalk with women living with HIV declaring their status by being on the catwalk, which has travelled to various cities around the UK. And again, I think that just came out of a conversation in the pub about what could we do about the crackdown on women's access to healthcare and the increasing closure of domestic violence services, gender-based anti-gender-based violence services, and that has now flourished into incredible creative empowerment movement. I guess the last one, which I talk about more really in the book, United Queerdom, was when we invaded Nigel Farage's pub, our budget version of Trump, and that was in 2015, nearly like 10 years back now. And that for me was really intersectionally powerful, because at the time, UKIP was saying, frankly, the last kind of migrants we should allow into the UK are those living with HIV. Breastfeeding mothers should face the wall. When he was on a train from Manchester to London, he didn't like hearing all these international voices because that's not what Britain should be like. When gay marriage was introduced, it was raining, and he said, it's a sign from God, and various other like fascistic, ridiculous things. So literally, we did a call out from ACT UP London to other grassroots groups who were pissed off with UKIP, which stands for United Kingdom Independence Party bigotry, to say, well, let's create some kind of cabaret, because it was the 70th anniversary of the official end of the Nazi Holocaust, 2015. And I say official like that because we still see what's going on now. So we wanted to do a cabaret in the spirit of the Weimar era to platform creative resistance against fascism. And so each different group created their own different part of the cabaret. Nigel Farage was at the time was saying, I'm a man of the people. You can come and speak to me in my pub. And we were like, all right, we will do. But obviously he wasn't like asking us kind of people to come and have a chat with him. So how it animated was we got a bus down from London to Kent to his pub. I booked the function room. I think I said it was my mum's birthday. Thanks, mum. And we held this cabaret opened by my friend, an amazing Holocaust survivor and activist, Ruth Barnett, who looked at the parallels of the Holocaust and what's going on now with rising fascism. And obviously, this was in 2015, how things have changed. And yeah, we had Chinese, Arabic, Mexican language classes on the different pub tables in response to what he said about he doesn't like hearing all these international languages. We had breastfeeding mothers with their boobs out at the bar. We had queer activist groups dancing to It's Raining Men because of what they said about bad weather. We had a pinata which said bigotry, which we all smashed in the middle of the pub. And various other. Oh yeah, then we had a migrant solidarity traffic jam because he also said that he was late for meetings because of migrants on the motorways. So we had a traffic jam blockading his pub, and then we ended it with a conga line around the pub singing "We Are Family." And we actually saw him and confronted him, and it did catch a lot of attention, which is probably another reason why I'm not with you right now. And so for me, and not just that was a fabulous action, but the I've seen and witnessed the movements and the collaborations that have come out from that. For example, like queer, feminist, HIV, and healthcare DJ collectives, which has come out of that. So these things do spark long-term ripple effects. But for me, I'm deeply inspired by the key infrastructural connections that you make, and maybe how we can progress with that for the roadmap ahead. Just one last thing I wanted to say. I'm actually in Berlin at the moment because I've been on tour with my film Censoring Palestine, the Weaponization of Anti-Semitism. And in Germany, I'm sure you've been watching, it's particularly bad, the censorship, which is why I'm here doing the film tour. We've done lots of screenings in the UK. In Germany at the moment, it's illegal to say genocide, it's illegal to say apartheid, it's illegal to say from the river to the sea. Kids are being suspended from school if they're wearing kafirs. The main, breaks my heart, the main cultural centre, Oyun, an incredible queer, QTPOC, feminist centre, has just been cut all their funding because they literally held, so they're going to have to shut down. They literally held a Jewish Voice for Peace meeting, which was deemed anti-Semitic. It's no surprise that this is coming from Germany, the biggest European economic supporter of Israel. And I always used to say, because they're drenched in guilt, I'm a kid of 4 Holocaust survivors, 2 of them from Germany. And yeah, so the intersections of Jewishness, queerness, HIV, anti-Zionism for me, I'm sure are just as live for you as well. And anyway, my friend from ACT UP, he's doing his placement at Charité Hospital, which is, I think, one of the biggest hospitals in Europe. They're pissed off because they literally can't say it's a genocide what's going on. Otherwise, them and their professors will be kicked out of the hospital. As we've seen, what's the latest? There's only 11 out of 36 working hospitals left in Gaza. So I did a screening and we did a workshop about what we can do. And they've just produced these wicked, and it sounds so minor in the grand scheme of things, but we have to have hope, right? Stickers which say, can we just agree that we should stop bombing hospitals? How's about that? And these stickers are being plastered all across and posted all across the university campus because, it's not illegal what they're saying. If they said this is a genocide, they'd get fired. And they're obviously part of a European and beyond network of doctors working in hospitals who are also working for justice. So I guess that's one of my latest examples of how we can see the roadmap from here. And I'll shut up now because it'd be great to hear your thoughts on how we can deepen this and build ideas for actions from here.
I mean, I do have just maybe one immediate thought about about that, which is that I think you know, one thing that could make a really great action, and what organizations like JVP and ACT UP, I think what they do really well is they um, very cleverly reappropriate images of the aggressor. And I'm thinking again, just like more specifically back to the specific World AIDS Day action that happened this year.
We seem to be having a little technical difficulty. Hopefully this will be resolved soon.
No. Jason, do you want to jump in? I think maybe see, hopefully when they've unfrozen.
Yeah, no, I could jump in and see whenever you're back. We'll pop that back in. But yeah, I think we're at a really interesting and pivotal moment, especially as we have institutions and our community centers suppress perspective and suppress voices. Most recently, I'm actually blocked by. It's pretty apropos to this conversation, but there's a group called the LGBT Network, and it's the Long Island's LGBT Center. They have several community spaces across Long Island, including Queens. But they had an event about a pro-Israel event, and also a statement about it. And the statement from their executive director, we talk about reappropriating ACT UP imagery and slogans, but he reappropriated silence equals death in kind of the most egregious of ways. And I, for instance, called that out and was blocked. And they completely, I think even now, are not allowing comments on their posts. So it's a very interesting moment that we're in. And Dan, you brought up a lot of the groups that came out of ACT UP, and I think that's what was kind of impactful about ACT UP is we had Treatment Action Group, which is a treatment focused group. We've had Housing Works, which is focused on housing, AVAC, which is focused on prevention and built out of HIV vaccine research and advocacy, and Health Gap, which is more of a global approach in ending the epidemic. And I'll say to your point, Dan, is when we think about iconic actions that ACT UP has had, like Stop the Church, that was in coalition with reproductive justice too. So there's so many intersections that we could look back at and inform us of a lot of the parallels that we have in our movement work and our fight for a more just world. And that's what we could bring into this space. And it's been interesting too, because we brought a lot of those parallels within the COVID-19 pandemic. We even brought back some David Wojnarowicz imagery. That early in the pandemic, we said that if I die of COVID-19, forget burial, drop my body on the steps of Mar-a-Lago. And that was to invoke, Trump's neglect on COVID. That was to invoke the parallels that we saw around disease stigma and at least in the US, we were starting to see inklings of criminalizing disease. And that's ACT UP got into a lot of heat for that. They're like, how dare you draw parallels of HIV and COVID, and how dare you invoke David Wojnarowicz in this moment? And, a lot of the advocacy around COVID were from ACT UP veterans and HIV veterans, and from healthcare activists. So when we think about these parallels, it's important that we stand strong in our convictions because they are real, they are true, and we can only, fight our current movements and and upcoming pandemic, threats to upcoming pandemics, if we draw and inform our parallels that we know are real and that we see, and that are happening in front of us. Back in 1991, I'm going to bring back to that day of desperation action. There was a small Infinity group that disrupted the CBS Evening News and shouted, "Fight AIDS, not Arabs." So this is along a long line of veteran activists, along a long line of queer, ancestral, and active roots. So I don't think we need to hesitate or need to have any fear in standing our convictions of, saying free Palestine, or ending a blockade in Gaza, or ending the genocide in Gaza. This has always been part of our roots as AIDS activists.
And I'm thanks, Jason, for taking over. I'm sorry, my Wi-Fi's unreliable, so I'm back on my phone. But hi, everybody. Yeah, also just like to add to that, the thing I'm thinking of, I'm also thinking about the action, and I'm sorry if you brought this into the room when I was switching over, but the action, I forget when it was, but um, it was an action where people demonstrated out in the lobby of the New York Times. Um, and that was another really fantastic action with like material takeaways. Also, there were newspapers that had New York Crimes, I think, was printed on it, along with a list of the names of the dead and lots of information. And I'm just thinking of this piece that I read recently by my friend Heron Walker, who was interviewing Nan Golden. Both of them were at that action, and the sort of like key takeaway quote of Nan's for me was, "The more of us there are, the more of us there are." And so in doing this kind of work, in evoking the tactics and the imagery of other movements that have been effective, it both like acknowledges and respects that particular struggle, while also like putting the two struggles into solidarity with one another very deliberately. And that can only really be a good thing, because ultimately, I really do believe that I think a lot of people don't know that they care about stuff, actually. And I think that sometimes people, I don't know, maybe people need to be given as many opportunities as possible to understand that they do in fact care about something. And the more ways that you can find to do that, the better. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that. Such as they are.
No, that's so beautiful, C. And Jason, thank you so much. And I've been taking some notes. So standing strong in our convictions, the more of us there are, the more of us there are. I love that. Greg, do jump in if you want. Otherwise, I get, and also just before I forget, solidarity to you for all the like trolling I imagine you've had and all the blocking. I've similarly had, I wrote this article, I'll just share it on the chat, for Attitude magazine, the title being, "I'm a pro-Palestinian, anti-pinkwashing, Jewish, queer, LGBT activist, and this is my thoughts on Israel Hamas." And, and I got tons of people who are like, "You're not even queer, you're not even Jewish," and all this kind of stuff. As well as more horrific things, of like pictures of soldiers with pride flags in Gaza and all of that. I did some sarcastic responses to some of them, but I don't have all day. So that was So that, yeah, solidarity for that. But I guess one other movement that American movement I'm deeply inspired by, who again I would have been wanting to meet if I was in America, is my friends from the Beautiful Trouble activist network. And I'm a facilitator with them, which I'm sure you know them. One thing which for me is responding to our conversation, A Beautiful Trouble is an incredible art activist network with hundreds, maybe thousands of tools, of principles, case studies, strategies, tactics for effective activism. One that is one of my go-tos is their points of intervention. And for me, that really crystallizes some of the efficacy of the actions throughout since the 80s to now that we've been talking about. How can we intervene in the status quo and disrupt it and bring the world to a better place? And they've got the points of intervention being the points of decision, the points of consumption, the points of assumption. Just getting up now. Points of decision, points of destruction, points of consumption, points of production, point of assumption, and point of opportunity. These are all places that we can intervene. And so I guess whilst we're maybe just on the last 10 minutes, or we can spend less because I'm sure you've got questions as well. Where for you from here? And I do hope that somehow you're going to have a little well-deserved break. But as we look into 2024, for you, with Visual Aids, with ACT UP, with the Bureau, with the Centre, with all the other movements that we're part of, collectively, where are your points of intervention that we can activate and bring people together? And I love what you said, I hope I got the words right, that people sometimes don't know that they care until they're there, or an action with the intersections are put in front of them. So yeah, does that make sense in terms of your ideas for the points of intervention from here?
Sorry, is that to me? Or is
Anyone?
that to...
Oh,
I mean, I don't know if I don't know if this is if this is like the best answer, or if this is the answer that you're looking for, but like at least for my part, as like a or as like a as like I'm a poet, and I'm a poet who's very invested in performing in community with people. And so that's like really like the last 5 years, frankly, have fundamentally rearranged the stakes that I place on myself when I realize that that space and that time is being offered to me. And therefore, how am I going to use that space and that time? And so, you know, anything that I can do in my work, which like has already been so community centered and community oriented in terms of like its delivery, now like those stakes are really like much more I care much more, and I'm thinking much more about how to use that space and that time whenever it is afforded to me. So I think it's like, you know, that's like I offer that as one small but really necessary moment of recalibration for me in my life and my practice. And I think that if we can all sort of like identify for ourselves what those moments might be um, within whatever it is that we're already doing and invested in, um, that's just even all the better. Um, I mean, yes, like it's wonderful to be mobilized and go do something that you've never done, but it's also wonderful and important to sort of reconsider how you're going to do the things that you're already doing. Um, so I'll just offer that from that perspective.
Yeah, those are great points. I always too ask myself, I'm like, you know, what are we doing to fight for liberation? And like, what are the stakes we're willing to take? And I think about Dan, like even sometimes jokingly, sometimes not, about like the trolls that we get online. And I invoked that David Wojnarowicz ACT UP post that we did for um, the peak of quarantine and the pandemic. And I think of this current moment too of, you know, how people are afraid to invoke our history and invoke very real parallels of moral and government failures that we have and how they intersect with the HIV movement. And I think people are afraid because they want to have, ACT UP history and the HIV history be on a looking glass and keep it there. And, in some ways have a collect dust. But I think how we fight for a better future and a more just future is if we apply lessons learned and we use our toolbox from our veterans and our long-term survivors that are still with us, and use them to, you know, fight for the injustices that we're seeing today. I think if we're failing to do that, then we're failing as activists and as queer people to really progress upon the liberation we wish to see.
Wow, you're so eloquent, Jason. Thank you. Where can we also do share links to your poetry? I would love to read more. And also, Jason, where can we read your writing, your wisdom after this call finishes? Because I want to more, and I'm sure other people. Do you write?
I've written for the body sometimes,
Oh, you do?
actually around some of the parallels that we've seen. And I
Mm.
most recently wrote about several efforts of AIDS denialists that we're seeing. Also been published by like Simon and Schuster and some awful people. So yeah, hopefully I can write more, but feel free to follow me.
Mm. Amazing. Thanks, Jason. Um, did you have how long have we got left, Greg?
I mean, we're at 8 o'clock, but it's okay if we go over. Nothing's gonna turn us off.
Okay, okay, great. Um, I mean, what other questions did anyone else want to explore? I mean, I've got tons, but I know that I've been saying them. Yeah, any other questions or issues that you wanted to navigate or explore?
I'll just say I invite you, Jason, and see if you ever have ideas for doing events at the Bureau. It's a space for our community and we like it to be used. We like it to be active.
Thank you,
So
Greg.
yeah, don't be shy.
Right. Um, yeah, and I'll just note too that the Bureau is like doors away from where ACT UP usually meets at the center. It's hybrid right now, every Monday at 7 p.m. ACT UP New York. And I'll say that after our World AIDS Day action, we've seen like a lot more interest in ACT UP. Our meetings during and since the pandemic have been, really low. Turnout has been like 10 to 15 people each meeting. And I think our post World AIDS Day action had over 50 people, which is like pretty unheard of in recent years. So, I think there's growth to be had in times of car that we're seeing. So, please stay plugged in and I know there's a lot of despair that's happening, but I think there's a lot of community that's been built and are building right now.
Thanks, Jason. Um, that's great to hear about the resurgence in numbers. I'm not surprised. The action was beautiful. Did you want to jump in at all?
I don't know, I don't know how much more to add to that, frankly. But I will say that I think it's not lost on me, and it's special that this event is being hosted by a bookstore in an LGBT center in New York City. Like, it's not lost on me that a haven of creativity is going out on the necessary limb to host an evening like this. I think in times of crisis, perhaps more than ever, it is really creative people who make anything really sort of owe it to the world to imagine better futures, to imagine those other realities that we could be living in, and frankly, to be furious about all of the wonderful realities that we're not living in, right? Like, I mean, there's this thing that I sort of keep saying over and over again. I've said it's Tuesday. I've said it 3 times already this week. I know. And here comes number 4, but like, rage and love really do go hand in hand. Because you would never be so angry if you didn't care so much. You just would. And so I think all of us who are feeling desperate and furious and enraged, I would encourage us not to quell those feelings. I would encourage us to feel those feelings fully and let them ignite in us. You know, let that be sort of like the spark underneath the vision for what could be here instead. Because it's not going to come along if nobody imagines it. You know, we can't build it together if we can't imagine it together. So that's my you can't see it, but I'm stepping down from my pulpit, but that's my bet on that.
Amen.
I am sitting in front of, a box of my grandmother's icons. So
Beautiful. When are you going to come to UK, come to London and do a poetry tour? That was so beautiful.
Thank you. I need somebody to give me some money.
Uh-huh.
No, but I would love to come.
Just looking for my stash of money. No, I'm looking for my list of funders I've been working through this morning, which a lot of them are about queer poetry networks in the UK. So I will send you them. And I will also send us all this brilliant conversation. And thank you so much, Greg and Richard from the Centre as well, for giving us the space. Has solidified and crystallized, even though it's like 1 o'clock in the morning for me, a lot of ideas in my head. Of how we can move forward in terms of the spokes, the intersectional movement building, the invocations, if that's a word. What you were talking so beautifully about, Jason. One thing that I still want to develop a lot more, but I know that everyone doesn't watch Zoom calls for more than an hour. Basically, like we all have, I'm sure, I've been like sitting there furiously writing posts at 3 o'clock in the morning since October the 7th, which was actually my 40th birthday. And I was having my party that day, and then it all kicked off. Biblical. And ever since then, just been writing and working out what to do. And I've been organizing Palestine solidarity delegations for like 18, how old am I? A long time, about 18 years, I think. The last one was in March, and it's called Solidarity is Our Weapon, Palestine. And we were supposed to go back this next October. And it's connecting with amazing movements. Greg, one for you, if you don't already know, the Educational Bookshop in East Jerusalem, another incredible bookshop run by my dear friend Mahmoud. That would be a good link up. We also connect with groups like the Freedom Theatre in Jenin. Again, my heart goes out to them. They've been raided as we speak. Jenin is again. And various different queer groups as well. But the unanswered thing for me, which I'd love it if we can work out, I was just like, I'm sick of sitting in London or Manchester, wherever I've been. I need to go back out there to my friends in Palestine, Lebanon, Jordan. I wouldn't go to Gaza personally. I wouldn't even get in. And work out how we can report and build links on the ground. Um, and maybe there is some kind of ACT UP Visual Aids Bureau media report that we can do about how we can connect and build active solidarity with people living with HIV on the ground in these places, and how that can animate what action we can take against the arms trade, etc., back in our home countries. That's just something which I'd love to discuss more. Do you have
Yeah.
any? Yeah.
Yeah, please put us in touch. Yeah.
Yeah, will do. I'll definitely put you in touch with the educational bookshop. If you had any thoughts on what would be useful on that front, um, Jason and C, do let us shout. We can talk about it on email. But yeah, just actually, lastly, then, do we want to invoke any other people in our communities, whether they're alive on this planet or not? Because I love also what you've been saying, Jason, about that. Is invocations a word? Is that a
Invoke.
invocation a word? Right. It's the author. Right. Who else? Um, who else would we like to invoke here now? How do we want to? Let's end this with bringing in maybe one person who gives us strength each, whether that's from the genealogy of activist movements that we've been part of, or yeah, let's invoke one person to continue our collective strength.
I mean, I would say I already mentioned Sarah Schulman. She's been very inspiring to me and so supportive of the bookstore from before we even had a space, when we were just an idea. And I love that our first event with Sarah was for Israel, Palestine, and the Queer International. She's just such a powerful voice, and she doesn't stop. And yeah, she's a hero.
Uh, I'm just getting up the link to her latest book. I don't know, she's probably written 3 since then. Let the Record Show. Um, uh,
Yeah.
for everyone watching. Yeah, big up to Sarah.
Um, yeah, I'll add that I hosted her book launch for the book, Let the Record Show at the 92nd Street Y. Um, and it's just like a very interesting time that like the 92nd Street Y is shutting down and suppressing voices right now. So I'm gonna invoke that in this space right here. We did the event with Alex Chi as well. Um, but I'll invoke Shotzi Weisberger, who was a JVP member and whose yahrzeit was on World AIDS Day this year, a year since her death. And when we talk about intersections of movements, she is someone who was there from, the women's rights movement to Black Lives Matter to Palestinian liberation. She was a healthcare worker during the AIDS crisis and was part of ACT UP as well. So this is someone who I want to invoke in our space and to always name her when we can. So if you want to look her up, please Google Shotzi Weisberger, or otherwise known as the People's Bubby.
Yeah, eternal be your memory. Truly. I wish I could have met her. I will put very quickly, this is a photo of her knuckles. But I'm gonna bring Diamanda Galas into the room. She I really was like the first who I would consider my first like ancestor in HIV in terms of a fellow Greek American who has never shied away from looking atrocity in the face and calling it what it is. And the tattoo on her knuckles says, "We are all HIV positive." And to sort of paraphrase you know, like the many interviews that I've watched and read of her speaking about that tattoo, ultimately it's like it goes back to what I said earlier about all of the spokes. Like if one of us has HIV, then we all have HIV. If one of us has to deal with um, homelessness or a lack of food and clean water, if one of us has to deal with the bombing of a hospital, like if one of us has to deal with any of this absolutely awful shit that's happening in the world, then we all have to deal with it. And we don't get to absolve ourselves by putting, you know, by putting sick people on different hospital floors, right? We don't get to absolve ourselves by, you know, looking the other way because it's convenient. We just don't get to do that. Yeah, she's not somebody that I know personally. Thank God that she's still alive and with us. But I don't know that I admire anybody more. So just bring her.
Thanks, C. Do you want to write any links, share any links in there? Because I'm going to copy the chat before it vanishes. I will share, and this is inspired by your poetry. C, I'm sure you know. Benjamin Zephaniah died last week, who, in my humble opinion, was Britain's best poet. Was such an inspiration for me. Amazing, humble, revolutionary, hilarious guy, an actor. He was also in Peaky Blinders. And I've got one of his quotes here. Everyone check out Benjamin Zephaniah if you don't know his brilliance already. And this is a little sticker that I found in my bag. Fuck power. This is his. This is not my words, but I agree. Fuck power, and let's just take care of each other. Most people know that politics is failing. The problem is they just can't imagine an alternative. They lack confidence. I simply blanked out all the advertising. I turned off the television and I started to think for myself. Then I really started to meet people, and trust me, there is nothing as great as meeting people who are getting on with their lives, running farms, schools, shops, and even economies in communities where no one has power. That's why I'm an anarchist. Here we go, Benjamin Zephaniah. That one's for you. So invoking him in here.
Wait.
Oh, thank you so much, gang. It was such a delight, and nourishing to chat. Share any other links, or if anyone wants to say any other last things. No. Thank you, and
No.
keep good fight and doing the
Thank
amazing
you,
work.
Dan.
Thanks so much, all. Keep in touch.
Someday we will host you in person.
I know. I need to get. I'm working on either marriage or a letter from the UN. Marriage won't work. The spouse visas, but they'll
Or
still
maybe
know it.
the Bureau needs to take a visit to London.
Yeah, definitely. Please all do that.
We'll come to you.
That's the best thing for now. Yeah, please do. Oh, have a good rest of the evening, everyone.
Thank you so much, all of you. You all be
Yes.
well.
Take care.
Good night, all.